All right. Call the meeting of the Hudson River Board to order. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Behind us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Ferrer.
David Bergstresser.
Present.
Michael Astor.
Here.
Albert Hayes.
Here.
Philip Klein is absent. Absent or
Excused.
excused. Thomas Stover.
Here.
Mark Finkel.
Here.
Michael Clark.
Here.
Robert Leslie.
Here.
Robert Fulton.
Here.
John Hudson.
Here.
Carol Wright.
Here.
Richard Farrar. Here. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, I need a motion. Are there any questions about the meeting agenda or any revisions? Need a motion to adopt or revise the meeting agenda? Do I have a motion?
No. I'll move for a second.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Don't want to speak? All right, so I have no guests. Do we need an executive session? Any? No. All right. No need for an executive session. We'll move on. Public comment period. Would you like to speak at that too? Thank you. All right. Did everybody read? I need approval for the meeting minutes from September 13th. Need a motion. I have a motion. Do I have a second? Okay. Mr. Stover. Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Well, this is going too fast again. Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can find my report on page 14 of the board package. During this past month, myself and our Chief Financial Officer made a journey to New York City, to the governor's office there, to attend a minority and women-owned business enterprise meeting with the governor's deputy secretary to the governor for exact title, civil rights, excuse me, who heads up the MWBE initiative in the state. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the governor's executive order that increased the MWBE goals for all state agencies and entities. Also, in addition to that, and what you find in my report, I would just wanted to briefly comment or make a statement that relates to a recent article in the Daily Gazette about Fulton County and the costs that were incurred by the county in their litigation with the regulating district to recover the previous 2 years' school and property taxes. And acknowledge that that there are current year's school taxes due now for 2011, and that there will very shortly be, as of the first of the year, property tax bills received for state-owned property around Great Sacandaga Lake. We acknowledge that they're due. We fully intend to pay them, as we have always intended to pay them per our statute, and yet we have no ability to pay them presently until such time that we receive assessments that are due from downstream beneficiaries. We fully expect to be in that position to do that. However, it is difficult to say when. I also just wanted to note again that along with that, and part of the Fulton County Supreme Court decision, I believe there was there are no interest and penalties attached to those tax bills, past or present. And I would be happy to take any questions.
The meeting you had in New York City, is it a mandate for us to contract, or is it to attempt to?
We have to attempt to.
Okay.
Now, that's not the way it's written, of course.
Right, that's what I read. I read as much of it as I could.
You have to set a goal.
Right.
You have to set a goal and do everything you can to reach it.
Okay.
There's no purveyors in the Black River District, right? At least up in the wilderness.
Again, we've found it very difficult for the types of projects that we solicit for to find MWBE companies who either, they may be in that particular profession, but they generally don't service that area.
Right.
Right.
But again, we continue to reach out. And
Okay.
I would also point out that on page 45 to 51 is a copy
Right.
of the district's master goal plan that was submitted. Actually, I believe it was the Friday before we went down there, because part of this meeting down there was to discuss the goal plan. In our goal plan, we actually set as a goal, based on this disparity study that was undertaken back in 2010. So our goals are actually 28.92%. The 20% goal was, other than written in the executive order, was not really that clear. However, in January, we need to restate those goals, and we may consider moving to the 20% goal, because we believe that is certainly more reasonable
Okay.
expectation for our participation.
Right.
And that's all right with the governor's?
20%.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
They'd be thrilled to see you get close to it, and certainly more thrilled to see you exceed it.
Okay. Thanks. I don't have any more questions. Thank you. All right. Get into committees. That's audit committee.
We have the report of the audit committee, I believe. And I guess we open that up.
Turn it over to Mr. Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
How's that?
We have with us again this year Mr. Randy Shepard, who is going to present the district's independent audit.
Thank you, Mr. Farrar. Chairman of the committee, I don't know if this is a good spot to be, or where should I go for the? Okay. We are reporting on the June 30, 2011 information, and you should have a packet in front of you that I left. If you don't have one, Rick has a few extras there. It's a summarized information. It's a skinnier one. On the front of it is a letter on our letterhead addressed to the board. And what this letter is a recorded communications letter that gives you an overview of the audit, kind of discharges our responsibilities to you for the audit process, because you do hire us to perform the work for you. We don't work for management, and it kind of summarizes that information. And we'll go through that. The way it's laid out, some of you have seen this before, the bold item kind of tells you what the requirement is. Beneath that, we describe what that requirement means, and then our response to that is in the italicized bold section. And in the first area, qualitative aspects of accounting policies, or practices, I should say, tells you that you establish the accounting policies for the organization. To the extent those change year over year, we want to let you know that. There was one, I'll call it a change. It was just an implementation of a new standard related to intangible assets. It didn't have any impact on you because there was nothing that qualified as an intangible asset for you. Other than that, everything was pretty consistent year over year. There's nothing in your statements that there's no authoritative guidance on. There's not transactions where you've taken a real aggressive stance on it and we've had to make an opinion, so that's a good thing. The second paragraph talks about accounting estimates, and the only significant estimate that the revenue board has relates to its other post-employment benefit obligations, and that's described in Note 11 of the financial statements. And that really represents about 46% of your liabilities at this point. And that's going to continue to climb, as you'll see in some of the slides later on. But when we look at the audit, we look at the assumptions and factors associated with developing that estimate and make sure they're reasonable. So we look at the inputs that are given to the actuary, and from our perspective, the inputs and the percentages being used are accurate and appropriate. Next, we look at disclosures that might be sensitive. And if you look at your financial statements, and obviously you've been on the board, you know what's going on. There's quite a bit of sensitive information occurring at the district right now. We had to disclose that information in footnote 8. And to the extent that that litigation impacts your ability to cash flow and be in existence in next year, we also had to impact and adjust our audit opinion this year, which is the first time we've had to do that, and indicate that the Revenue District had a going concern issue, that there's a potential situation that come June 30, 2012, you won't have cash flow to operate. So we had to adjust our opinion to that effect. Difficulties encountered in performing the audit, again, that's because we work for the board. If we had an issue with management, we'd want to let you know that. And the audit goes very well, continues to go well, and has been since we've been involved. So I do appreciate Rick and his staff's assistance to us getting that done. On the top of page 2, if we have any audit adjustments in relation to the audit, we need to show those to you and tell you what they are. And they're actually attached to this letter on the last page. And I kind of summarize those in 2 ways. Adjustments that we propose and adjustments that management may have proposed, because they may have given you preliminary information for June before we started the audit. So if we gave you a new number at June and you wonder how we got from A to B, this is how you do it. And there's some things that are timing matter. If you look at the management adjustments, it's just a matter of not having that information when we started, but management gave it to us afterwards. We had a few small adjustments in our process there, the biggest one being the New York State Retirement Incentive. There's a new GASB related to booking those obligations. If you have a retirement, separation from service, you have to book the obligation out there, about $300,000. And the other big one, which I know you're aware of, is the reducing the AR and receivable under management adjustments related to the AG's involvement in that collection effort. So they take their cut off the top of what they collect from you, and that's your contribution to that cause, shall we say. So you can see, beginning of the audit, we had unadjusted numbers of about $2 million positive change, and at the end of the day, it was a negative change in net assets of about 1.1. The biggest piece of that being that AG component. Okay. Getting back on the letter, again, disagreements with management. Same thing, if we disagreed on an accounting matter, let's say, Rick said, I'm not going to book that obligation for the AG, and I said, well, you actually have to, and we couldn't agree to that, we have to tell you that here, but we didn't have those situations going on at all. We got a representation letter from management that said they gave us everything we needed. We're not aware that management reached out or consulted with another accounting firm about a matter, getting their opinion on it before giving us information. And then throughout the year, Rick and I have regular conversations about things that are going on. That's part of our normal process to help the audit process go smoothly, give Rick some advice. That's not the reason why you retain us every year. That's just part of the ongoing communication. And that's, for the most part, that's kind of like I call it a report card of the audit, gives you really a sense of what's happening with the district for the year. And now, if you want, we can look at the next sheet, which is a highlight. It's got some pretty pictures on the front there. Looking at the agenda, again, I talked about the opinion is an unqualified opinion with an explanatory paragraph. So it's still a clean audit opinion. I think that's important to note. It's a clean opinion. It just has an extra explanatory paragraph that says, at this state, you may not be able to be in existence next year, but everything else that's reported is absolutely accurate. Significant 2011 items. Again, I talked about the negative change in net assets. As you know, you delayed a lot of capital projects in the Hudson River area, and then some changes in policies throughout the year that were approved by the board. In the future, obviously, what you're looking forward to is the decision on the appeal. Getting those assessments will have a big impact on that going concern that we talked about. And then, as you know, you had to use a lot of the reserve funds on the Black River side to pay that decision in the Supreme Court of Fulton County. So if we look at page 2, which I think is always a little more helpful than just the financial statements themselves, because it gives you, although it's high-level information, it gives you historical, which really allows you to see some patterns. And in the total assets, you can see it climbed since 2007 up to $16 million. In your current assets, that includes both cash and receivables. And the reason that's going up is because you're still waiting to collect on those outstanding assessments. However, On the flip side of that, even if you collected those, you're still going up because you'd have it in cash. So your assets are moving in the right direction there. On the liability side, you know, the most substantial liability that will continue to grow is your second line down, your other post-employment benefits. You can see it's about $4.8 million. And that's growing each and every year based on your actuarial reports. Your accounts payable is up really because 2 years of the property taxes that Mr. Clark talked about a little bit there, that you have the obligation for it, and you're just waiting to have cash to pay for it. And then other liabilities, the big jump there was the retirement incentive I talked about that will be paid out shortly. And so your net assets, I mean, it looks like you have sufficient net assets, but again, most of those are tied up either in infrastructure or other obligations. So it's not like you've got all this excess cash and everything sitting around. So an uneducated reader might look at that and say you're fine, but when you really dig down the details, there's other obligations there. On the next page 3, which is your revenue expenses, you can see revenues were down in 2011, down to 6.6, almost exactly where they were in 2009. If you look at the assessment line, you can see a decrease of 1.2. What we did with that, the piece of the AG cost, the 22%, the piece that related to the 2011 assessment that was charged, we reduced the assessment for that because you know that you're not going to collect that. In 2010, the piece that related to the assessments from 2010, we recorded down on the operating income or loss line. You can see there's $1.1 million. So because it was already recognized as revenue in a previous year, we had to take that as a charge of an expense in 2011. So there's a little bit of a different treatment, but the reason being the time period that we're in. Expenses, obviously are down $7.8 million from 8.1. We had to reduce some things on that end to help balance things out. And you can see your change in net assets there at 1.1 million. Any questions at all? I don't know if I'm going too fast all through this at all, but really stop me at any point. Now the next slides are some graphs which will give a little bit more information for you. Page 4, the first graph is your current ratio, so taking your current assets to your current liabilities. The trend there, you can see, should be an upward trend. Since 2007, that's been a steady decreasing trend. You're about 2.43 to 1. Now, generally speaking, 1.5 to 1 is a good ratio, so you're still above, what a good ratio is. But the track of that is really what's more concerning as to where you are right now. Change in net assets, you can see there. I will point out that the graph itself is graphically correct, but the number above 2007, that negative 260, that should say 712 positive. So where the point on the graph is correct, just the labeling is incorrect on that number there. If you want to make a change in your comments. So, kind of up and down, but generally a downward trend. Another interesting graph on page 5 is your cash flow, which again just kind of repeats what's going on there. The blue line represents your overall cash flow for the organization. The pink line is your operating cash flows from operations. And the uptick there for 11 really is kind of a timing issue in terms of when collections come in versus when they're assessed. So, generally speaking, we're still in a downward trend. The graph at the bottom, we show your revenues by source. So clearly, everyone's aware that the largest source of revenue for you are your assessments. And in 2009, 10, 11, as you know, is the one budget cycle, which will be starting a new one next year. So you can see where those are. And then on the last page, what we've done is broken out cash on hand by area, and back to 2008, and we gave some projected information which provided us for 2012. And you can, you see the red line there is Black River, the blue is Hudson. So in 2009 to 10, you can see the big drop in the blue tables. If you remember, that's when you liquidated the Sentinel funds on the Hudson River side. And then from 11 to the projected 12, we can see the impacts of taking the reserves out of the Black River side. So at the end of 2012, you're almost a net, $8,000 negative cash at the end, which kind of is why we ended up in that going concern opinion on the financial statements. So, again, none of this, I was talking to Rick the other day, none of this is a surprise to anybody. I mean, you know really what's going on. And I think through talking with Rick as an organization, we've been on top of this as much as we can all the way throughout the process. So from my perspective as an auditor, I'm comfortable that you're doing what you can do to make the operations go. Yes?
Question for you. I know that the projection 2012 for HR is a negative 68, if everything stays the same, we shut the doors, which It's not going to happen. But I'm just, according to a chart here. But the Black River side, it's showing, you know, that the cash at that time is just about zero. What are you saying? Are you saying the same thing there with that? Or, because Black River's carrying itself, but...
Right, because this is right prior to assessing for the next,
Okay.
for the following year.
Gotcha.
That 60,000 is probably, based on the way that I forecast, a worst-case scenario. That 60 could be 120. I mean, there's certain
Yeah.
things, certainly when it comes to any capital project, those things are generally expensed, you know, in terms of my forecast, earlier than the cash is probably going to be expended, so. But
yeah.
again, the major difference here is the Black has a beneficiary base whose assessments are being paid.
Well, you answered my question
Right.
in that it's at the end of the cycle.
It's
then
at the
we-
end of the cycle.
So,
and
that's
so
all.
the very next day, theoretically, it would go, the very next day, we'd be assessing. If
Yep.
prior to that point, we felt concerned about the cash flow in the Black, we could actually do an earlier assessment.
Or delay payments.
Or delay payments, but again, I would probably lean on the earlier assessment side, but at this point, you know, that is almost, you know, 8 months down the road, so.
Well,
you know,
okay.
We have time to
One less
fine-tune
thing to
that
worry
number.
about then.
And that is one of the weaknesses of a balance sheet-based ratio, is it's always a point-in-time type of look. The next day it could be entirely different, but what you're looking at is the trending. Generally speaking, the cycles kind of repeat themselves, so even though, like, as Rick said, you could get $1 million in cash the next day and it changes the picture. That's generally speaking where you're at. That's-
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I got a question. Oh, after he turns his.
If it's blinking.
While you're doing that, Rick, I got a question. The 22%, is that written in stone with the
No.
AG's office?
It's up to 22%. We've had that discussion. My
We haven't heard
feeling-
anything. I mean, they kept getting bantered as 22%, 20. Again, is that worst case scenario?
It is. We have asked the Assistant Attorney General who heads the Civil Recoveries Bureau, or at least
Okay.
handles our case for the Civil Recoveries Bureau, whether that 22% could be used as part of the negotiation with the 5 counties. That he is taking that under advisement.
Okay.
Hasn't flat out said no.
Okay. Good.
We have nothing more, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thanks. You want to get into the permit or the permit committee? Are you two ready?
Mike's going to have a little show. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under old business, we have no old business. Under new business, we had I'm sorry. Under old business, we still have the permit revocations. Mr. Clark is going to be presenting that.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I am standing before you to give the board further detail as to one of the encroachments that we briefly touched on last month. If the board recalls, at that point we had discussed 2 separate cases. Relative in the same part of the lake, not next to each other, but different circumstances. One of the cases, without having to name names, although we certainly can, is we're in the process of scheduling a resolution conference with myself, other staff, and the permit holders and their attorney. I fully expect that that will result in a satisfactory remediation to the problem. That problem being an unauthorized construction of an access road on state land. At this point, I'm optimistic that we will have that resolved and not need to take that further. In other words, bring that case back to you, the board, to ask for action. The second case, and we have photos now, I had mentioned involved a significant amount of fill on New York state land. It's in the town of Hadley, North Shore Road, almost half mile from the Conclaville Dam, give or take, just to put everybody's give you a little bit of an idea. So, of course, the lake is out. Walk down the gangplank, and this is as the water has receded, of course. State land is, if you could advance that, maybe we can find a photo that still has the stakes in there.
I think it might be.
Is an odd shape in there. John, if you could point to it right here, you could help me out. There's a big.
There is one of, yeah, we do have one that is.
Actually, while John's orienting himself, I would offer that the permit holders in this case received a letter, received our September 30th letter detailing for them the date and time of this hearing, as well as the location of the hearing. Our office has received the return receipt card indicating their receipt of that notice. They are entitled to be here to offer their defense to what Mike is going to present. I don't see anybody in the room who would either be the Bells themselves, Michael and Linda Bell, nor any representative here on their behalf. Maybe, Mr. Chair, you'd like to ask that question of anybody in the audience, if there is any representative.
All right, is there anyone here to represent the Bells in their presentation of their side of the case? I got no response.
In the absence of a response, I would say that staff is entitled to go forward and the board is entitled to make a decision, make a determination in their absence. Obviously, it's at your discretion whether you want to make that determination today, you want to hold it in abeyance, give them an opportunity, or even make the determination later on in today's meeting in the event that the Bells are attempting to get here and just haven't arrived yet. I've received no communication from either the Bells nor
My
anybody
personal
else.
opinion, they've had plenty of opportunities
they've had
to
plenty.
respond. They've had plenty of opportunities to present their side, even to staff.
I agree.
They just seem to completely ignore us. So.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, you're right. I was going to get into that in a second. I just want to try and orient the board briefly. State land in this shape is essentially, it makes a 90-degree bend in here, but there's a large portion of this area that you see right now, the house being off the photo in this direction. A large portion of this is the state land.
Is that all Phil?
That's all fill of varying depths.
Okay.
A little bit of the history. Earlier in the year, late May, the Bells, like most permit holders, came to our office, wanted a work permit to make some minor improvements or modifications to New York state land. They had requested to place some fill. We authorized, and it's in the package, a work permit was issued for the placement of 10 cubic yards of fill, and as is our common language, for the purpose of pedestrian access. That's language that we use often, and almost consistently, with the thought in mind that the purpose of the fill can't be to develop the land further, make it more suitable for vehicle access or anything of that sort, given the fact that it's an access permit in the first place that's meant to give an adjoining property owner a legal right, a permit to cross the state land to get to the water's edge. They were given a permit, a work permit from the regulating district and at the Sacandaga field office. It's in your package, where they were permitted to place 10 cubic yards maximum hand rake or York rake behind a tractor, which is a relatively unobtrusive method of spreading fill compared with a piece of heavier equipment, a backhoe, a bulldozer, take it where you want. That's our standard language. That permit was issued, and I think it was June 30th of this year. Shortly after that, field staff discovered and reported that there was a significantly greater quantity of fill than 10 cubic yards. Given the topography of the land, it's difficult to say how much, but counting the number of trucks, I personally witnessed a portion of this. I counted the trucks that were in the line. I know how much each truck carries, and there was already fill down. Having been around the business of engineering and construction a while, it was, by a trained eye, I would say there's at least 150 cubic yards of fill material placed. I will say that not all of that material is on the state land, but a significant part is.
Safe to say they may have exceeded their original estimate of 15?
Greatly.
Okay.
By they
leave it
exceeded
at
the 10 cubic yards by at least an order of magnitude. That,
We'll just
I
leave it
don't
at
think
that.
that's an unreasonable statement to make, and I would stand behind that.
Okay.
We follow the normal route. It's not uncommon to have a few substantial encroachments each summer. Our normal process is to immediately bring the photograph, document, bring the photos back to the office, which our field people did, and discuss it, and immediately issue a letter detailing the findings and order the permit holders to cease all activity and either begin to remediate or wait for further direction from the regulating district. And again, that depends on the actual type of the encroachment. That correspondence is in here. We did receive an initial response from the Bells in the form of a phone conversation and I believe a letter back to us. And then all communication essentially it dried up. We routinely had sent letters. We had established a deadline. The deadline was well before the previous board meeting to remediate. I did not. I can go through and count the number of the items of correspondence to which we've received no response, but it is in the package if the board wants to look. Since the time of this photo, the work didn't stop here, and this photo was taken after a stop work order was issued in writing. And since that time, and I think there's further photos in here, this land has been, it's been finished off. That's one of the New York State property monuments, which is more or less down the middle of that area.
There's the whole, that's the left turn it takes.
Yes.
Everything to the left.
Everything to the left in sort of a pie shape out through here is all New York State land. And again, the fill on that's varying depths.
There it is, right.
And some of that work does progress below mean high water. That's an issue that's beyond just the regulating district's issue. And do we have photos in here in the package of where the land has been actually finished? They topsoiled, seeded, and then used it as a, I mean, it's just what you'd expect people to do with an area like that next to the water. The problem is they improved and developed land that's New York State land. That large tent is a good portion of that. Certainly, this end of it, this half of it, is on the fill along the New York State land. You'll notice also that now that's no longer just soil and gravel and whatnot. It's actually been seeded.
So they didn't roll the sod, they just seeded it?
I believe they seeded.
Okay.
Looks like it was
Yeah.
hydro-seeded, probably.
It was hydro-seeded,
Oh, all right.
actually, yes.
Because it came up
Came up quickly.
pretty quick.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Doesn't the Department of Environmental Conservation have authority over that state land?
That's, DEC does have, there's, the state land around Great Sack and Dog is really multi-jurisdictional. I mean, DEC enforces ECL, and in large part, that includes, and help me, Article 15, which is protection of waters, everything below the mean high water of the reservoir, any type of activity there that's not navigation by watercraft, and even that they administer, but anything that's, any work below mean high water they administer. They have helped us many times with other issues involving unauthorized tree cutting. And DEC enforcement did respond to this, and they, to my knowledge, they have investigated it also. The outcome of that, I'm not sure of yet.
I've read everything I had before the meeting. I haven't read this more voluminous one here, but.
Well, really, everything that you had before the meeting is included in there.
Yeah.
What's different is there's photos now, and then there's, that last piece of correspondence that you would not have had since the September 13th meeting. But yes, DEC did also respond to this, and they have investigated it, and like I said, the outcome of any of their activities we're not aware of yet.
We don't know if they've done anything official.
Not sure. I have one quick question for Rob. Who assumes the bulk of the responsibility, the contractor or the landowner?
Well, the landowner at this point, they're the permit holder.
Permit holder.
Landowner can do what they want on their own land with, I think, certain setbacks, but other than that, we don't have jurisdiction to affect what they do there.
That's zoning.
On the New York State land, it is the permit holder's responsibility. From our perspective, our authority extends as far as issuing or not issuing a permit, revoking a permit, assessing fees and appropriate penalties for damages on the permittee. This question takes two tacks. There's our responsibilities and there's DEC's responsibilities. Our responsibility is really centered on the actions of the permittee. DEC's responsibilities would take into account both the actions of the permittee and the actions of the contractor. I suspect, having spent some time at DEC doing this kind of enforcement, that they are waiting to see what the outcome of our case is before they progress further against either the permittee or the contractor.
Okay. All right, good. Thanks. Go ahead, Mike.
So essentially, you can see that even well after the Bells had received multiple notices to cease and desist, and that there was a deadline to actually remove the unauthorized fill and remediate the area, return it as close as possible to the pre-existing condition, or the prior condition before the fill. They didn't do that. They followed through with, or their contractor did on their behalf, followed through with the work and finished the area off, creating a very large lawn. We have had no response effectively, or it's certainly not to our demand for corrective action, which is, again, I would point out that at this point, I would point out that last month we brought 2 cases to you, 2 situations. One of those cases last month, we have had contact. We do have an indication that there is a high likelihood of being able to get corrective action on the part of the permit holder and not advance that request to the board members to take more drastic action with respect to the access permit, so that we can deal with it. We can deal with that one at the staff level. There has been no activity as far as responding or remediating whatsoever. It has been effectively 4 months, and so we're advancing this a request to the board with this information now, based on this information, to consider stronger action against the Bells. Ultimately, where we would like to be with this is this encroachment needs to be removed. It needs to be corrected. Although it's from a private property owner's perspective, they created a more desirable condition for themselves. It's also a bad example of what's allowable on state land, mainly because it's not allowable. So we, at this point, my request to the board on behalf of all the work that staff has done is that the board consider either, and this may sound like splitting hairs, but stick with me for a second, either revocation or non-renewal until such time that we have an action where they, on the part of the permit holder, to correct this encroachment on the state land. And the reason I say revocation or renewal is at this point, now we're in the middle of October, the normal process at the Sacandaga Field Office, where the access permits are, the new applications and the renewal applications are processed. At this point, the field office starts when new applications come in due to people buying property and then making application for an access permit. We don't issue new permits at this time. Rather than we note that the receipt of them, we hold the access permit applications and then process them when the renewal applications are processed, historically in December, this year in November. Basically, it's acknowledging that the season is over and that a new season, we're preparing for issuance of permits for the coming season next year. I would recommend that the board consider a letter to the Bells stating that their access permit will not be renewed for the permit year 2012 and or subsequent years until this condition has been corrected. Effectively, it's still a revocation. It takes away the access, the ability to use that access permit, and it takes away the ability to have a dock or a boat or anything else. Yes, sir.
They
they've effectively ignored us all during this process. And if we say we don't renew we're going to hold the new renewal permit in abeyance until they do something, and they don't do anything, they just go ahead and use the property and enjoy it and get access to the lake and everything else, what do we do then?
Well, that's an interesting thing. It's going to be difficult to keep people from walking across it or playing Frisbee on it or playing pitch and catch or setting out a lawn chair out there and having a beverage. But what we can do is prevent them from having a dock and a boat attached to that dock and any of the other, or applying for a work permit to now do something with their stairs or applying for a work permit to make any additional permitted
Mike, can
encroachment
we
to there.
go in and remove
We
the
can do that.
material?
And we can do that, and that is one way to affect.
That will basically,
But
Next,
then can we
If we were to do, I mean, of course, to actually go in and remove that fill, and to
At their expense?
regrade it properly, and so that the slopes are stable and protected, we're going to incur a pretty fair cost. So if the board were to, and this is a viable option, if the board wants to go that direction, I don't see a problem with doing that. However, in that line of thinking, I would suggest that no access permit be reissued or to the Bells until the cost to do that work has been paid to the district has been reimbursed for those costs. So yes, that's one option to do it. The other option is hold the permit and not issue it, effectively leaving them without an access permit there until they correct it themselves. So and of course, the third option is to continue with the letter writing campaign in the hopes that. So there's really three possibilities.
I'm loath to let them enjoy this improvement for God knows how long by just ignoring us. I think they ought to be brought back to the status quo ante before, as soon as we can, whether they do it or we do it. But then can we get our money back? How do we do that?
I'm
Attached to the.
There's-
right. It could take.
There's two avenues through which we can recoup the money that we might expend. One would be we bring an affirmative case in what would then be Saratoga County Supreme Court. We would obviously have to document every expense as they came up, bring it before the court, establish the boundary, show the work that was performed and the expense of such work, get a judgment against them, and then enforce the judgment. That in and of itself is a time-consuming and somewhat costly process. The revocation of the permit conditioned upon no reissuance to either the Bells or any successor in interest to the Bells until they repay the amount that we expended, obviously would again require us to document exactly what expenses we incurred, limiting exactly to only the remediation efforts, and basically require payment before we issue again.
That's basically attaching it to the permit fee.
Right.
Effectively,
Chairman.
yes.
Is there a difference, my concern is about public perception of what we're doing. Is there a difference, as far as not renewing, I assume would never be public and never hit the papers, as opposed to a revocation? Does that become a news item so people know we did something?
That's a good point, and Mr. Finkel, that's that's truly the primary difference. A revocation is, both of them are actions, or actions that result from a decision by the board. Revocation, it essentially means you can't use it right now, the permit's gone, and it certainly sounds harsher than a notice to the permit holders. The Bell said, we will not issue a renewal application, and you will not be allowed to renew your access permit for the following permit year and subsequent years until. So, you know what, it's again, it's almost like the question, it's similar to the question that Mr. Astafan asked about the graph there. It's what side of that slice in time are you on? Right now, no permit, it's a revocation. If they have no permit after the first of the year or March 15th, technically, it's still a revocation in that they're not going to enjoy use of that area next year. Practically, the water, the time to enjoy the water is pretty much over. Very few people are still swimming.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Here's what I see in a nutshell, at least in my opinion, the direction we could take and should take. 1, immediate revocation. 2, non-renewal until they remove and correct the situation to the satisfaction of staff, which would be outlined by staff in writing. If they're not going to do that, and we go in there, then payment in full of whatever it costs us to put it back to its original. And then at that point, if we reach that point with them, where they can apply for a new permit, I would say issue a permit under a probationary period.
We have the right to. Is there a provision in there for a probationary period?
Well, the funny thing is they're annual temporary revocable permits
12 months, yeah.
anyway. So
Right.
Yeah,
you've always, that's the beauty of the permit system, although it's rarely used, is that in a sense they're all probationary. It's just never looked at that way because they expire, you know, they're issued after the first of the year and they become
So they have
null and void March 15th in the following year.
They always have a 12-month probationary
Right,
period.
it's a temporary revocable permit
Right.
upon which we can impose whatever conditions we want, as long as those conditions are, have some, right, meet a reasonableness standard. Tripping over that word. As long as it's not arbitrary or capricious, why we might impose a condition on this permit but not on their neighbors, then
We
we're fine.
didn't request anything capricious, just normal, ordinary. The permit application was handled the same as any other, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You placed an amount of fill on New York State land well in excess of that which was permitted. You've made no effort. If you would like to have your permit in subsequent years, you need to remove that excess fill. And
Yes. I have a question. Does this happen often, or is this just an aberrance? This just a kind of a,
To this extent?
to this extent?
this volume of fill, it's certainly not in my tenure. I'm certain it's happened in the past. Those were different times, and it's not something that it's not something that, although somebody would say is a precedent, that you would want to continue precedent or not.
No, not at all.
It's the type of thing that, it's the type of activity that we, as the regulating district, truly need to guard against in protecting the state land around the Sac and Dog. And you can, it's one of those things that can lead to totally change the character and lead to new land use and development around Great Sac and Dog, which is not something that's permissible. Placing fill without authorization, creating roads, cutting trees, those are, and there's many other activities that in a certain, to a certain level, a minimal level, that they're permissible to maintain something that already exists, to cut a tree that's dangerous, that could hit a structure that we've inspected. Those are all types of things. Placing a small amount of fill so that you can walk, and the more senior citizens in a family group can walk to the beach are entirely permissible.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Question for legal. Just looking for a simple response. If we send them a revocation notice and go ahead with this process that hopefully we're going to do and soon, why can't we put a snow fence up? And if so, and they take the snow fence down, can they be arrested for doing so? They have no
Yes,
legal
we-
access to waterfront because we're taking it away. And the snow fence is on state land.
We could erect a snow fence. The expense of doing so and of watching it is a
Snow fences are inexpensive.
slight
They're-
concern.
You can put them up quickly, and if you go by once a week and it's down, I mean, if you have people watching it, I'm looking at it, can we arrest them?
Well, we don't have the power of arrest. We could.
Can we have them arrested?
We could call law enforcement. Law enforcement's pretty much made it clear that they're not going to enforce trespass on New York State lands. However, probably could get the interest of law enforcement over destruction or removal. Mr. Stover had talked earlier about the removal of survey stakes, survey monuments. These I suspect he is correct, are probably violations punishable with full weight of law enforcement.
It occurs to me that, this thing, if we remove the fill, and we're going to charge them, it'll be years before, they'll tie us up in court for years, and we'll incur this huge expense. Maybe the snow fence is an inexpensive way to make the point.
See, what I was thinking is, revocation, non-renewal, and we set up the standard by which they have to remove the fill to save us the expense, because as we know, we can't afford it right now, and they know that too. And then repayment and all that stuff I said, and probationary permit, if we decide to renew their permit. But in the meantime, if you got a snow fence there, it kind of obstructs their view a little bit. It stops them, I know it's just a snow fence, but from walking from their property to state property. Mm-hmm. We got to come down on these people extremely hard and very quickly. Dancing around this issue, I think, is not an option.
Sorry. Can you
Go
go
ahead.
back about 7 or 8 frames?
Or do you want to see the whole of the line, Albert? That's on another group of.
This ain't that place across from that church, is it?
Yes,
Yes.
We did work down there, we did riprap there. That's why I wanted to see that riprap.
it's on the other floor.
In your packet,
They
there should be
There's a photo of
photos.
it. They thanked, it was in the permit application, or the work.
Where you're looking
order
at that shoreline from the water. I should point out that we do have the ability to move that fill out of there with our dump trucks and backhoe.
Just
Do we have
where the
personnel?
church is in the back.
If we empty out the office, yes.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound
No, I'm just
glib
FYI.
about it. That's what it would, we'll need to take our field assistants and anybody that can drive.
Is there an erosion problem? Is there a pollution problem with what they put in there? Or?
When the water, during springtime high water, there could
Yeah.
be. That's,
Okay.
depends on how well they stabilize that slope and how well the vegetation has taken hold.
Yeah.
It's
And I
almost
have-
like a
next
bay
spring.
in there.
Okay.
Because I remember we did riprap work in there, it was all slopey right there. So basically, all they did is
And I have-
almost right in there, they put all that fill
And
in there.
One more question for Mr. Leslie. Would it be possible to have the EC put a little pressure on the contractor also?
Yeah, we're working on that.
Okay. come at them from 2 different directions.
We rip-wrapped this whole area here.
Yep.
And it's up this high. It's at all this fill now, it's covered our rip-wrap. That's come over that they placed.
Really?
Yeah, this is all stone back up into here.
So it did have erosion issues in the past.
You can see where the tank is over here.
It will, you know, and given the steepness of that slope and
That's high
its
water,
history,
about in there?
high water's probably to the top of that stone anyway,
Okay, right up in there.
771.
Really?
Mean high
So it's
water.
going to wash out underneath it anyway.
Yeah, that's.
There is a potential for that, yes.
A lot of erosion right there. I can see they leveled this right off.
Yeah, they did.
But DEC is aware, when we had them out for, they did their investigation, they seen that there was no silt fence or anything put up.
Right.
So that's,
They probably weren't very happy with that.
They still got all the boulders up there
If they covered up
by the
riprap,
roadway?
they ought to have to put it back.
Well, they took them out of there, leveled it?
Or pay for it to be put back, yes,
Yeah.
one or the other.
can you go to that one slide, Rick, with the pole?
Is it on this series?
Yeah. I think it's on that series.
While we're waiting, Mike, I might suggest too that if it got to the point, I know you're saying, or pay for it if we have to put it back, I think it's best that they have to put it back with their contract to your specs, because we don't have the staff
I
to
absolutely.
take the time to do that.
It's
you
always
know?
preferable to have somebody else correct
So,
yeah. Mistake.
their error or mistake, or,
I think we've wasted enough time and energy on
Yeah.
the whole
it
thing.
has been, there has been a time commitment involved with this.
Just real quick, this monument used to be on the ground, top of the ground.
Yeah.
That's how much fill.
Give me an idea, 2 feet, 3 feet?
I'm gonna say probably, we measure, I think it's 18 inches.
Okay.
At that place, the closer you get to the water,
Yeah.
the deeper it
Okay.
gets. The-
Right, it slopes.
So if the board agrees, I would ask for a motion to revoke or not renew, and the language is your choosing.
I prefer to revoke.
I do too.
I do too.
That becomes public, then, doesn't it?
And I think we should
Well,
publicize it.
it's certainly part of the minutes that,
Yeah.
Well, you know, as I go around the lake, living down there, you know, the one, I mean, I think the image of the Hudson is improving greatly, but the one thing you always heard is, how can we let this person get away? How can
Yes.
you let that? That's what we need to get away from.
yes, sir, you're right,
So,
we hear that all the time.
and if we
too.
just say, okay, we're not going to renew, and people see that out there and don't know that we've done something, they will say, how come you haven't done it? And, well, on one-on-one, you tell people, yeah, you have. But it'd be something that could be
It's not as obvious.
public knowledge.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go.
Now, I'll make a motion then that,
Could I
Hold on.
offer two things? First, Mike, you had indicated that it was a written stop work order. I believe that the Bells were given a verbal stop work order, which was then subsequently followed up in writing. Just for that point of clarification. And then, if I could offer you this language as part of your motion, starting there, which gets the successors and interests and whatnot.
This ought to be done correctly, so I think we ought to discuss the motion before we
Sure.
make the motion. You know what I mean?
I think the board's right to do that.
all right, I would offer a motion that the board revoke the access permit and the condition of the issuance of any renewal of said permit or issuance of any new permit at the access permit site to Michael and/or Linda Bell and/or their successors in the interest to the property establishing eligibility for such permit. Upon payment in full, all costs incurred by the regulating district in removing the unauthorized fill and restoring access permit area number 15874 to its pre-construction natural state. I will also include in that motion that non-renewal be contingent upon Mr. and Mrs. is it Bell having a contractor come in and remove and correct the site to its original state under the guidance of written direction from our staff as to the process in which to be followed. And that a probationary permit be issued if and when correction of this violation has been satisfied with staff, with permission and approval through the board.
I don't think we need the probationary statement because it's an annual 12-month, it's a renewable.
It's a temporary permit.
And wasn't it in the original wording that it was to be restored to its original condition? Okay. So do we need to specify that it has to be done by a contractor of their choice?
Well, I don't see where the motion should state that we should have to do it first.
Oh, it doesn't. I don't think, did it?
Towards the end there is talking about repayment, so that's saying that we're
Well,
going
the
to do it.
repayment could be our efforts to go over there and restake, our efforts to go over there and constantly inspect, staff time.
We should be paid for that.
But it includes removing the unauthorized fill.
Right.
So it gets into everything.
Okay.
And if we did it,
We could we remove that and just say that we want it back to its original?
yeah, because if we do it, they'll say we
And leave it
encroached
open.
on their property and we.
Right.
I understand where you were coming from, Mike.
We will cost a lot more than they will have incurred should they elect to do it themselves.
Right.
We will do it so that we restore the state land to its natural state, and that may or may not leave their property in a state that they would like to leave it. They'll end up having to take their contractor to do additional work anyway. Clearly, the path of least resistance and least cost for them is to have their contractor remove the offending fill. If we take the fill, it's ours, and we will put it to other uses for the district. Not that there's a great cost associated with that, but they're not going to recoup any of that cost.
So then we need to clean this motion up then. So
Go back to the original, and let me hear the end of the original one.
We just got to get rid of the end payment and pull the cost incurred by the district and figure out how to transition from property establishing eligibility for such permit and
Well, I
need
think,
for them to remove
you
Until
know,
such time as the property is back to its original condition?
and then you can, if we have to go in and reestablish the site to its original state, then they would be responsible for all costs associated with that.
So upon restoration of the
Yes.
access permit 15874 to its pre-construction natural state, and, if necessary, payment in full of any costs incurred by the regulating district in removing such fill
There
and
you go.
restoring the permit area.
That would work.
I think it'd be a good idea to polish it up and then send us a copy of a draft.
I think we should move this
No,
today.
I'd rather do it right now.
You want to do it right now?
Yeah.
Well, can we
Where do these people live there year-round, or they?
year-round then?
I believe they do.
Okay.
Our correspondence.
I would rather do it
with
as
them
soon as possible so that the impact on the landowners around the lake, or how many of those leave? I know what the exodus looks like up my way
Right.
this time of year.
There are a few people, and more each year, that have made the lake a permanent home.
But there's still a lot of second homes here. Disappear.
Yes.
So
Can you give
then we have
Tom?
a motion
Is that all right
before,
with you, Mike?
Well, we just want to clean it up so everybody understands.
a motion before the board that the board revoke the access permit and condition the issuance of any renewal of said permit or the issuance of any new permit at that access permit site to Michael and/or Linda Bell and/or their successors in interest to the property establishing eligibility for such permit upon restoration of the access permit site 15874 to its pre-construction natural state and, if necessary, payment in full of the costs incurred by the regulating district in removing the unauthorized fill and restoring such access permit area to its pre-construction natural state.
Okay, so you want,
I would offer that
Offer that as a motion?
as a motion.
all right, I have a motion on the floor. I'm sorry, you said.
I second it.
First was, I'm sorry, who made the first?
Mr. Grantafan. Seconded by
Second was Mr. Hayes.
Mr. Hayes.
Can we just,
And the
Any
vote?
discussion? Go ahead.
what if they had somebody like their neighbor apply for the permit?
They would actually not be eligible
Oh, they would.
because it's a front lot access permit that adjoins their property boundary. And it's, because of that, the only party that would be eligible for that, strictly speaking, or generally speaking, would be the Bells. It's, because it's, and more or less, it's between their private property and mean high water of the reservoir.
And the lake.
And
And the lake,
if I'm
yeah.
not mistaken, issuance of the permit is still subject to restoration of the
Yes.
property.
So they sell the property, just a scenario, they sell the property. Then the new owner of the property,
The new owner of the property, being the successor in interest, would still be subject to the
Right.
cost
Still be responsible.
or restoration. Which, basically what they've done is, whatever the cost of the restoration is a diminution in value of their property, of their real property is next to the lake.
Any
just
other?
as long as that's me.
Just a little bit of history. The Bells, just recently, in the last couple of years, applied for that permit. They've lived there a number of years without one. And they applied and they got it. And since they've had the permit, they've done no improvements, no dock, no mooring, nothing there. So they really, by having that permit, now by the improvements that they did with the land and stuff is what they use more because they don't have anything in the water. So by just taking away their permit, originally by not renewing it wouldn't have benefited because they didn't have any improvements anyways. So
I saw steps.
there's steps.
However, I would point out that they may not, but if at such time they decide to sell that property, a new owner would, still has that liability attached to the permit area. And odds are that someone buying that lovely piece of property is going to want to have a boat in the water, and a dock, or what have you.
That brings up another point, though. If they don't want to renew the permit, if they never had one in the first place, there's no incentive for them to
That was
restore the area.
thought
But I-
process of a store, some kind of fence, something temporary, but we could go permanent too, if it's
I
possible.
never, I just assumed everybody that owned lakefront property.
We have an accurate survey of what it looked like before, a contour
absolutely.
survey. We have a very good idea of what the native condition was like, including the extent of the riprap and whatnot. If the Bells aren't going to do it, and they don't want an access permit, and they someday, whether it's next year or 5 years from now or 20, sell that property, this will be in the file. There are still other notes in the file similar to this. That owner is going to have to, the new owner, if they want to apply for an access permit, along with their application fee and all the recorded deed and everything else they're going to have to show, to the district's satisfaction that the encroachment has been remediated. And if they don't get a permit.
Can we put a lien on the property, an
Well,
official lien?
Kind of is.
We could. What we would need to do is perform the work ourselves, secure some certain for the amount that they must pay us, bring a suit in the Supreme Court, secure a judgment, enter the judgment, and then establish the judgment as a lien against the property. It would then collect interest at the statutory rate of interest, which I think is 9% per annum. And if they didn't do anything for 20 years,
Be a substantial amount.
be a substantial amount of money that they owed.
Yeah.
And that's,
And if they sold it, then that lien would have to be satisfied, wouldn't it?
yes.
There's a number of reasons why that lien would have to be satisfied.
And
No scenarios.
that actually probably is the strongest message that the board could send. It obviously requires some upfront spending by us.
You know, if we were forced to go that route down the road, and I hope we don't, I hope we can resolve this with these folks, but if we have to, yeah, we expend a little bit of money up front for legal and all that, but I'll tell you, down the road, whether it's shortly thereafter or 20 years, we're going to recoup what we have expended, plus, like I said, if it extends 20 years, 10 years, it's like having a savings account,
Right.
which we hope not to have to go that far, but we can't lose in that sense, even though we're going to have to spend some money to take it to court.
I'd also like to continue to pursue the DEC's
Yeah.
involvement with the contract.
Remedy.
DEC may have additional authority to impose fines and exact remedial efforts.
Okay. It sounds to me like we'd get better. It might work a little better with the contractor than the owner. The owners can sit back and, if they were never worried about a permit in the past.
Well, kind of piggyback off what you're saying, Dee, in the notes, which I must say were well
Yeah, they were well
documented. Thank you, John. You did a great job, and I don't know, Mike and anyone else who was involved. Thank you for the documentation. This is what we need in situations like this. But it said in there that the contractor was told by staff and talked to the contractor about what they were doing and what they weren't supposed to be doing. So there's knowledge there of and evidence of the contractor being told to cease and desist, et cetera, et cetera. So I question, you know, do we have grounds to go after the contractor also on this?
Yeah.
We'll let DEC do that.
Or even DEC? I mean, we
I
could
think it
share
is-
our information with DEC. Yes.
That is, I think, our avenue
Okay.
to make sure that DEC has at its disposal any of the information that we have at our disposal, including, if necessary, testimony of our staff at their hearings.
I was always under the impression that our relationship was with the permit owner only.
Yeah,
Or interaction.
I'd be a hell of a lot more viable, I think, than just telling a truck driver or something that he's got to quit work. The guy that's paying him is telling him to do the work.
Yeah. So now, just go tell the guy that was paying him.
Yeah.
Okay. So any more discussion? I have a motion and a second. Anything? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Rick pointed out to me that our insurance adjuster, I think, is going to meet with John Monday, with regard to a telephone call we received at, I think, SFO, indicating that Mrs. Bell had fallen into one of the holes dug when we dug a hole to replace a stake that had been removed. We have not, I think, heard anything further from the Bells with regard to that alleged claim.
Okay.
Just-
It was on a cell phone. He got the message stating that his wife fell in a hole. She's going to the emergency room. His lawyer will be in contact with us. And that was it. We have not heard another word back since then.
But we are going through some pretty potential claim activities by the insurance company.
Well, I think that had to be separate from what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Timing
Just-
is interesting on all
For
this.
your information.
And DEC, everything that, all the correspondence and anything that happens with the bells, we do update DEC on everything that's taken place so far.
So they're right up to speed on
Yep.
all of it.
I want to commend the staff for the surveyor and you and everybody else for being so thorough. Now, I'm still not sure, were they given a written stop work order, or were they all oral?
There was oral. Since then, we have now come up with our own form for a stop
Yeah, I think
work
we ought
order.
to, have a
Duplicate.
written stop work order.
We have one now in
Yeah,
place that we'll
good.
start using.
There's no problem with just an oral stop work order, is there, right?
No, a directive of the agency, whether oral or written, is
Sufficient.
of the same force and effect. It's simply that when you have an oral stop work order, you've got to have the staff member in to testify as to what he said. It was actually John who, I think, issued the oral stop work order. Whereas a written stop work order becomes a self-authenticating document of the government.
And you send it, return receipt,
Right. There were a series of letters sent, July 13th,
So it is well documented.
yeah, August 4th, and I think one other, in which the regulating district made clear that no further work were to take place. And as you can see, they finished grade it, seeded it, and put up a tent. In fact, and held a big party, we suspect.
Just to re-clarify that, verbal was stopped the day we found the encroachment with the work going on. After that, then we wrote them a letter telling them no more work was to continue. So
It's
they're
essentially a written work order.
Right. Just,
July 13th.
right.
All right. It's a shame it came to this point.
Yeah.
Anything else? All set? All right. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
You had a motion made by Mr. Astafan. Who was the second?
Who was the second?
Seconded by
Mr. Hayes?
Mr. Hayes.
And then
I'm sorry.
unanimous.
And the vote was unanimous.
Well, that was interesting.
Then they ignored it.
That is.
Well, if we let this go,
Yeah, like,
John will blow your horn on that later.
Precedence.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Everybody will point this.
All right. On to the committees. Governance. Mr. Astafan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple things under old business. I'd like the board's guidance and maybe approval, we'll see. First one is the confidential evaluation of the board's performance. Rob, I just want a quick question to you. This is public information, am I correct, as the results? I don't mean who put what where, but as far as discussing the outcome of it? Is that public or?
Yeah, to
Okay.
the extent that any of the board members want to discuss their individual comments or marks, they could. The summary itself is submitted to the authority's budget office, and I believe that they treat it as confidential. It doesn't mean that you have to.
Okay, okay. If you think I'm stepping over the line, please
But it's
Kick me.
actually
kick
your
me.
fellow board members who
Okay.
will
Same here. And I'm going to open the governance committee to the full board, because there's really nothing here that needs committee approval. I just wanted to update you, the confidential evaluation of the board is in. It was in on time, and thanks to Rob, he did what was necessary after receiving the information from all the board members through me, and he sent it on to the right authority. I just wanted to give you a brief overview, and I think it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. Not everyone agreed. You know, a lot of times you have these evaluations and everybody just puts yes or I agree. And in our case, we didn't all agree. And I think that's good. And it doesn't mean that anyone is doing anything wrong, that the board's doing anything wrong, or staff is doing anything wrong. It's showing that because times are changing and we have new leadership, that we're looking to improve ourselves through having a better understanding of how the board operates. That's how I see it anyways. And what I've done is I've had a discussion with some of the staff about the report. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to work with staff to address some of the current concerns that the board members checked off in the evaluation, and see if staff can come up with some kind of strategy and or outline in which we can address those concerns. And it may be as simple as just having a in-house training, or maybe advising that there's a seminar or training, you know, given by the state somewhere around New York State that we can go to. And then, you know, present that to the board at some later time. You know, it could take 3 months, could take 5 months. It's a work in progress.
Present to the board what?
Well, what I'd like to do is take what the board has outlined in the evaluations, talk with staff to see how we can improve responses by the board members to answer their questions in doing so. I know I'm speaking kind of in Greek here. I can give you an example. Let's see, where is it? Right here. Oh, thank you. For example, board members have a shared understanding of the mission and purpose of the authority. Not everyone agreed, okay? And that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that maybe we need, for example, to have an in-house seminar on some of these things that educate some of us to what they are, or a better understanding of what we're supposed to be doing, or a better understanding of a review process or a specific topic. I mean, I can get more specific if you want me to go down through this. And
Isn't a lot of that on the website?
well, I don't know, but maybe some of the board members don't know that. I'm saying, because a lot of us are new members, and this is new to us.
Sure.
And
So you're going to come up with a recommendation?
yeah, and again, it's a positive thing. It's not a
Okay.
negative thing.
You're going to do this in committee. I have a question for Rob. I know there was something in the mission, from the governor's office about
The mission statement.
the mission statement and committees.
Yes, we have received, I think it's the authority's budget office.
Correct.
That's right,
ABO
yes.
does an assessment of all of the information that should be.
And I just want to point this out to you, Mike, before you get too in depth. We have to webcast it.
Well,
Oh,
yeah, I think what the chair is alluding to is the ABO sent us a note which basically, among other things, said that the manner in which we conduct our meetings, where we have our committee meetings within the larger noticed meeting, doesn't comport with their view of how committee meetings should be conducted. They're suggesting that the open meetings law requires notice of each meeting, of each committee meeting, separate and distinct from the notice of the board meeting. And that although the committee meeting might be conducted an hour in advance of the regular meeting, if we are going to conduct the regular meeting and the committee meetings at the same time, temporally, we need to adjourn from the regular meeting, convene a committee meeting, adjourn from the committee meeting, reconvene the regular meeting, and proceed forth. So I think really what they intend is that if we're having a 10 o'clock board meeting, we'll have an 8 o'clock, an 8:30, a 9 o'clock, and a 9:30 committee meeting.
And that's,
Or 10 and on.
Or-
so committee
or-
meetings, you're saying, according to state, committee meetings have to be open to the public?
Committee meetings are open to the public. The way we conduct them now, they're open to the
Is that
public.
because we're a public authority, or?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm coming from a different municipal train of thought, and some of the committee systems that I see, they're not open to the public.
Well,
And they say they don't have to be because it's not a full quorum of the board. That's why they have committee meetings.
well, it's,
So this is interesting to me.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
yeah, that, you're right. This is a discussion for another time, and setting up the
That makes sense.
somewhat different committee structure. But it depends whether business is transacted, whether quorums are present, et cetera.
And as to whether you work in committee or one-on-one.
Right.
So,
Right.
So I guess bottom line, the report's in. I look at it as something positive. More than one person responded outside the agreed column, so it's not just one person. And it tells me that we need to try and better ourselves, and we do that on an ongoing basis because it is a learning process. It always is, no matter where you are in this process. And if we can do it better for each member, I think, that's part of our duty. And I think with working with staff, we can come up with something, present it to the board to see if it makes any sense, and to see if it might be helpful to any or all the board members as far as having a better understanding of this whole process. And that's the only thing I wanted to bring up about it, really.
Nice.
Unless you have individual questions or concerns.
Anybody?
Okay.
I would probably suggest if you want to work one-on-one and bring it through the governance committee back to the board.
Okay.
How's that?
Yep.
We'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thanks. The other thing is, every month, Rick is very good at giving us a picture of where we're going to be financially down the road. And as we know, it changes from day to day, week to week. And for us to make good decisions, we need to have that information. And again, he's providing it to us. But personally, I think we're at the point financially where we can't wait until April, May, or June to see where we are financially for sure. I would like to see, with the board's direction and approval, where we can ask or task staff to put together different scenarios, financial scenarios now, immediately. Not do it for next month or the month after, but immediately, and get it out to us if, in fact, they're able to do it in that time frame. With different scenarios. Scenario A, if we do nothing and we go along like we are right now, then right now we're projecting June 2012, give or take. If under scenario B we were to do this, it may extend us out another 6 months to a year. If we do this, it may bring us back 6 months. I think we need to have different scenarios to look at to make a decision as to what we need to do and when, because we've got very good staff. They've stuck through us throughout this whole situation. But I'm also concerned about our staff. Now, if I were a staff member,
Let me stop you here, though. Why don't we bring that up under the Finance Committee when we get into that?
Okay.
How's that?
Good.
So that we get on with this, the governance
All right.
reports.
Then we'll go under new business, and I'll turn it over to our attorney,
Okay.
A, B, and C.
A on the new business is the second reading of the resolution revising the management exempt guidelines. On page 18, I believe the management exempt guidelines start showing up through page 38, I believe is where the resolution is. The resolution from the first reading is unchanged. Again, what it would do is adopt a new set of management exempt guidelines which would remove paragraph 4 under Article 1 under attendance and basically excise language with regard to flex schedule from the management exempt guidelines. That proposal is in response to the chairman's response to the IG report where he committed to the elimination of that flex schedule language. Because that was seen as a somewhat significant policy change, the board elected to consider that at 3 successive meetings, this being the second of those meetings. Is there any discussion on that at this point? If not, we'll bring it up again in November.
I think we'll like that one.
The second is a resolution to adopt a lobbying contact policy. This begins at page 39. Essentially, the Public Authorities Law, Article 9, Title 12A, Section 2987, provides that every state authority shall maintain a record of all lobbying contacts made with such authority. A lobbying contact is defined as any attempt to influence the adoption or rejection of any rule or regulation having the force and effect of law by a public authority, or the outcome of any rate-making proceeding by that public authority. We are occasionally contacted by paid representatives. Typically, those paid representatives would represent a permit holder, for instance, in the proceeding that we just had earlier today, would represent a permit holder in a permit application proceeding, or some other enforcement item. Under the executive law, section 166, we already keep track of each of those contacts by paid representatives. It's essentially a lobbying contact with regard to our permit system. This law requires that the board adopt a policy to keep track of lobbying contacts with regard to essentially our rulemaking. We don't have any rulemaking underway right now, but were we to have such rulemaking underway and somebody contacted us, we would keep track so that anybody who is concerned with who is trying to influence us has some idea of who that person is. If the chairman, for instance, were to have a son-in-law and that son-in-law was paid by whomever, the Fulton County Ditch Diggers Society, and they had a particular interest in a regulation that we were trying to adopt, there would be a record kept by us of the fact that the chairman's son-in-law was paid X number of dollars by that company or association to try and influence the chairman's vote with regard to our rules. That may be nefarious, it may not. Somebody would be able to tell, and everybody would be able to have access to that information. You know, my college roommate is an attorney and comes before the board. That may be a bad thing, it may not. But everybody would know that this guy was getting paid in order to influence the board in some way. And anybody who knew the relationship between me and that person could decide for themselves whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, including the board. That's basically why we have this kind of lobbying contacts policy requirement foisted upon us by the legislature. So it's not necessarily something new, it's just something that we have to do. So there's a resolution on page 40, which defines lobbyist, defines lobbying, shows what a contact is, and indicates that because the law requires us to, the board adopts a lobbying contacts policy, which is on page 42.
Transparency thing?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we have a resolution to adopt the lobbying contacts policy. Have a motion or any discussion? How about a motion?
I'll move.
All right. All right.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Thank you.
The next thing would be my council's report on page 43. There's not a whole lot of change in our litigation stance or posture. I did confirm as recently as yesterday that the Attorney General still is grappling with the idea of the 22% that they would impose. We are waiting for the 5 counties' appeal submission on October 24th, and I expect that we'll then have 45 days to answer. I also hope to get our answer or our reply prepared in conjunction with the Attorney General and get that filed sooner, if possible. But I suspect that the November meeting, by the November meeting, you will have all had a chance to see all of those papers. I did visit a couple of board members with the executive director earlier this month. One of the things we briefly touched on was the committee structure, separate and distinct from the Authority Budget Office stuff that Rick helped me through a couple of minutes ago. I would recommend that we take a look at our committee structure and, in all likelihood, reduce the number of committees closer to the required 3, maybe to 3 or 4, so that we certainly have governance, finance, and audit as required. Perhaps add operations as a 4th. We probably could do that at the January organizational meeting. I think it would behoove us to do that in conjunction with our likely move towards a more robust commitment, I guess, among each of the committee chairs to take a harder look at the items that come before that committee. And rather than hold the committee meeting during the regular meeting, hold the committee meetings outside of the regular meeting and then report on the committee findings or recommendations during the regular board meeting. So anyway, that's the sum and substance of my report. I'm certainly available to answer any questions.
You know, that seems to make good sense to me, because it fits into where the state is saying, you know, we'd like you to look at your committee system and maybe restructure it just a little bit as far as how you conduct it. And
I
perfect
inherited a
timing.
stack of committees when I took over as chairman. Yeah, we discussed it in the beginning.
Yep.
But I left them there for the time being. All right, yeah, no, I don't have any. I don't know, maybe it's for Rick. Any movement on the Headwaters study benefit?
It's probably for Rob.
For Rob,
Or
it's
Rob,
not
I
as
mean.
far as I'm aware.
Nothing further.
Okay.
Since last time, which was FERC had received the draft criteria and they're still reviewing it.
All right. I'm good.
Along that same line, we haven't heard anything more from Albany Engineering either.
Really?
We are in the process of preparing and submitting our answer. In all likelihood, the FERC's delay or reluctance to issue is tied to their recognition that if they were to provide us with that information, it simply would bolster claims like those made by Omni Engineering for refunds. That's speculation on my part.
That's probably good. Good advice. Okay. Finance Committee. Mr. Stoll.
Mr. Chairman, we have no expenses to approve. We have no old business to talk about. And unless you wanted to talk about something, the Mr.
You're in committee, yeah. Would you like to bring that up now?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. My whole point is that, you know, we're all looking at this very carefully. We only get together once a month. I think if staff's in agreement, and they may disagree with me, and I hope that they have time to comment on this today at this meeting, but if we could have staff come up with some scenarios that they see could or may happen, or an avenue we might have to take just in case, you know, a tree falls over the road or something, I think it would prepare us ahead of time to have it now, because, you know, I'd rather we be proactive than reactive. And I'm getting a little nervous just following it every month, knowing that June might or might not be the month. I think we need to take a look at any other avenues that are out there, if there are any. Now, staff might say it's a waste of time, you know, but I would certainly like to give staff the opportunity to agree with me, disagree with me. You know, I'm nothing personal. I think, you know, you guys are doing this day in and day out, and I know, you know, I got this feeling that, you know, you guys got something else on the table, but we haven't asked you to bring it out yet. Now, maybe I'm wrong. If I am, just say you're all wet and we'll move on.
Well, Mr. Estefan, I think you're right. We live and breathe this, and on a routine basis, senior staff goes through a discussion of the whole range of possibilities. So I think we'd be more than happy to outline that in a more definitive format. And keep in mind, those possibilities are sometimes change month to month, depending on
day-to-day.
Now, they've been fairly static or at least consistent. We're hoping there's going to be change and it's going to be positive soon. But yes, I think that I think the thoughts are organized in our heads. If the board wishes, we'll, if you want to go with a scenario type format.
You think,
I'm
you
sure we
feel
can do
it'd be
something.
worth the time if the board agrees with that? And if so,
I think it's worth the time for the board to see that, absolutely.
okay. You looking at, is it going to take you 2 weeks, a month? You know, we don't want to put you under so much pressure you can't do your day-to-day either.
Many of the things that I believe you're speaking about have already been discussed at some level.
Yeah.
So we're not, this is not
not
starting from
groundbreaking.
scratch. This is basically putting it together,
Okay.
presenting it in a fashion.
Is there some place between extemporaneous speech and prepared remarks? Because that's where we are. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum, whether it's
Yeah.
a permit system fee increase, whether it be a reletting of a contract for the release of water at Conklinville, whether it be a securing of a lease, securing of authority to lease land at Conklinville to provide a developer with the opportunity to generate their own power at Conklinville and thereby give us a much larger percentage of the revenue generated by such power, whether it be a pursuit of authority for the regulating district to generate its own power, either at Stillwater, where we probably could buy the Mercer plant for a reasonable amount of money, or the or generate power at Conklinville, where at a time in the future, that contract under which we provide water to Brookfield Power for them to operate EJ West will expire. These are all things that, you know, we talk about on a regular basis.
And those are just on, and those are even just on the revenue side of
revenue
things.
side.
We also, while we're speaking about those, keep in mind there's various possibilities around the
Operational?
expenditure side. Well, and operational, of course, directly relates to the expenditure or vice versa. So if the staff, I think, would be happy to put our heads together soon and prepare what we see the range of possibilities as being. I would ask that, I mean, given we actually have a relatively short time period between now and our next board meeting, which I believe is the 2nd of November.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
We moved it.
So it's really just over 3 weeks. We could, if it would be acceptable to the members, staff could shoot to have that type of information to the members in advance of the meeting.
That'd be perfect.
If, I don't think that's, that gives us a couple of weeks to sit down and put pen to paper and formalize our thoughts.
It makes sense to me. The board agrees, because one of my other concerns, gentlemen, is that we've got staff here that, for reasons that they can only express, have stayed with us, and they want to stay with us, and they're working to make everything happen so that, we're in business for years to come, which, we're all hoping and visualizing that takes place. But I have a concern that we need to just let staff know that we're taking a proactive approach, because a year or 10 months isn't much time, and if I were them, I might be thinking of jumping ship. And let's face it, they got families, they got mortgages, and if, whatever we can do to show them that we're being proactive and that if there's a bump in the road, we're ready for it, I think will help ease their minds that we're going to get to where we need to be. But we got to do it as a group. And it's just some of the thoughts I've had, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I can make a comment there, unfortunately, being the longest tenured member sitting here, it's been a bumpy road for the last 2 years, 3 years, whatever I've been here.
That makes sense in 3 years.
Yeah, when I first got on here, was one of the first issues I dealt with was the FERC ruling. We've been facing that ever since.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and yeah, any suggestion? I think we've endured quite well, though, all things considered. The number of times we've been punched in the teeth. So,
Yes, indeed.
so
Okay, any more on that?
I would just add one other thing, that we are approaching the end of our fiscal cycle this coming June 2012. So the date that we've been often targeting as the cash flow issue that we've all been certainly tracking very closely over the last at least 2 years, now is coming at the exact same time that our current cycle ends. So I think any discussion that we have in terms of scenarios, from strategic planning right, down to the revenues and expenditures, capital planning, need to be discussed in the context of the next 3-year budget cycle. So it's going to be a little more complicated to discuss it in that context, but certainly something necessary. So we'll, in terms of what we present, we'll try to keep it in that context, and it may help as to why staff is, approaching things the way they are versus, if we hadn't, if we didn't have a cycle coming up, because this budget planning is fairly complicated and lengthy, and again, it's running at the exact same cycle that we're going cash down. My report will be very brief. As I begin each of my reports every month, I start with the Fiscal Outlook highlights, both on the Hudson and the Black River area. And again, on the Hudson River area side, I do point out where our current fund balance is at, and right now it's at $278,000. The number stabilized this month, mostly because there's some cost reduction efforts that are kicking in, and some of the cash in the way it was posted for this particular month. So sometimes you get, on the revenue side, you may get either the water power, you may get a double hit of that. You may get the apportionment on the Black River side that gets deposited on the Hudson River side. It may be a large one month. You may get 2 in a month. So that's where you get those fluctuations. So in this case, the fluctuation was to keep it a little bit steady for this particular month. However, having said that, the trend is still down, and the outlook is still targeted to be on or about the end of the fiscal year. I just want to point out that the fiscal cash flow report that's in the packet still leaves the headwaters benefit fee of $180,000 out of it. The numbers that Randy presented and the numbers that I gave him included that $180,000. It is an obligation. We're going to have to pay it at some point. I elected to take an extremely conservative, not extremely, but a conservative view of where our cash flow would be, and I factored that in to be right around year end. It may be July, it may be September, I don't know, but that's the difference in the numbers. On the Black River side, now that they do not have the reserves, as Randy pointed out in the cash on hand, you can see how the $3 million number is now dropped down, projected to be at the end of the year $60,000. Again, that number could be $160,000. Again, capital projects, the general board apportionment, there's a lot of factors involved as to where that number may end up. long before we get to June, in terms of where the Black River number will be, we will make absolutely certain that we're not sitting in June hoping that we're going to get assessment income back for the next assessment year the day after July 1st when we send them out, because that isn't going to happen. The assessments don't generally come in earnest until around this time. So we need a cushion. So we'll be looking at that very closely. The best news we could get is that something falls our way in March, and we are paid all of our back receivables, and this is not a problem. And then there's an apportionment bookkeeping we'll do, and the Black River will not be a concern in terms of where they're at the end of the year. But we are watching that month to month. Just one thing on the master goal plan, real quickly, the key components of that plan that we provided, there's two key components. One is the actual amount of dollars that you have available to spend. For this cycle, for this plan cycle, which ends 3/31/2012, which is not very far off, we're estimating that we have about $180,000 all on the black side that we could potentially let to MWBE firms. We are not even on the radar screen. If we were to do 100% of that, other than we would probably get an attaboy, it isn't going to change any of the state's numbers. So I just wanted to put that in that context. Now, again, if something falls right in March and we get our past receivables back, then obviously that number goes up, and maybe we move the needle a little bit for the state. But that's the key component. How much money do you have to spend, and then how do you come up with the 20% on either side of the MWBE ledger. Page 71, I just wanted to walk real quickly through, although there were no board expenses to be approved for this month. On 71 is the general ledger detail report for all of the travel and meeting expenses of everything that gets booked to general board, which is all of the general staff, the director, the general counsel, myself, the administrators, and the board members. This report will be provided every month. This is kind of a higher level, but it does provide some detail. And if you look at under the travel and meetings category, you can actually see names in there. Ferrara, you see some dollars.
Great.
You see Clark. Generally, when you see staff, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, it's mileage, and it's generally mileage for use of. It's always mileage for use of a personal vehicle, obviously not a company vehicle or a district vehicle, and generally that mileage will be associated with board meetings for the most part. In other cases, it may be we're traveling to attend a seminar or something, in that nature. When you see a board member name, again, that's generally, it is probably 100% mileage. So Klein, for example, for September, his charges hit for that month, and as board members submit their expenses, they're approved one month, and you'll see them in this general ledger report the following month. So I just wanted to give you kind of an overview on how this works. The only other component, if you will, for travel meetings is this BK, I used to call it BKmer. That is the Bank of America card. That is the card that the director uses to pay for generally the rooms and meals of the board members. That will generally be, other than some of the board member expenses, the largest expense you'll see on this report. And that is a monthly bill, it's a monthly credit card. But again, for the most part, it will be the room charges. And if you go through the rest of it is the detail of that particular Bank of America credit card, to include the detail and purposes of all the room charges, which again, board meetings. So
This is great,
it's pretty
Ray.
straightforward.
This is fantastic.
And then there's receipts after that. So this more than meets the IG's issue with some of the oversight and issues concerning travel meeting expenses. I think this addresses it, and it will be in here monthly.
Quick question.
Yes.
How many credit cards do we have within our organization?
We
You
have
know?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe. Do you have a credit card? Right. So senior staff and one, so Hodgson, myself, the director, Mr. Fulton, and Mr. Mosier are the only I'm sorry, on the
Carol?
Hudson River side, and on the Black River side, it would be Carol Ray.
Okay.
So 6 cards. The general counsel does not carry a credit card for the district.
Poor guy.
He pays
Thanks.
cash for this.
Pays cash for.
Here's a cash. 2 separate credit card, for the Black River, it is a separate credit card bill. The credit card on the general board and the Hudson River side is 1 credit card.
So you have the Bank America, is it Bank America?
Yeah, it's a Bank of America.
Bank America card?
Correct.
There's, each one on this side, HR, they're all Bank America cards? Is that what you're saying?
On the Hudson River side,
Yeah.
I'm not sure which.
I don't care, I don't care about Black.
Black River,
But I mean,
yeah, it's one.
so it comes under one bill?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, and then Mary
Gotcha.
Kay Buff, who is the senior administrative assistant, is the one who breaks the bill down
Okay.
and provides this level of detail to me when I sign the voucher. And then
No,
I provide
yeah.
it to the board.
I'm just asking to
Not gonna
understand it,
read.
because when I first got on the board, it was a little different, and you guys have really pulled things in and tightened things up, and this is great to be able to look at these expenses and understand, what they're for.
And we can tweak this as we go along if we feel that further information the board might want to see. That is my report.
That's it? Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Back to you.
All right. Thank you. All right, operations, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under old business, there is no old business. And under new business, we have a motion to request board authorization to execute agreement with New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. At that time, I'll report it over to Mr. Fulton.
Thank you. There is a memo which summarizes the work we've been doing with the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services to establish a public notification system through New York Alert, which will provide public notice of reservoir operations. As you probably know, New York Alert is an all hazards alert notification web-based system, and it allows the district, will allow the district to publish notices to a specific, and communicate those to a specific group of persons who subscribe to our portion of the New York Alert system. And in order to provide those services to the public and to that group of persons interested in receiving notification concerning district's operations, releases, and/or elevation, or any unusual emergency condition related to or at district facilities where in the Hudson and Black River watershed, the district must execute an agreement with the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. And so the staff seeks board authorization for the executive director to execute an agreement with the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services for the use of New York Alert services.
Rob, quick question.
Sure.
This is approved, just roughly, once it's approved and everything, you get all set up, would it take a week, a month, 3 months to get this in place?
We've already, during the course of the last month, staff's gone through training already. We have already provided the information, contact name, and information for the folks who will be notifiers, who will be able to establish notifications on the website. And it really, at this point, it's a matter of setting up the groups, the notification group, if you will, that's part of the New York Alert web-based portal, and then allowing folks to subscribe to it.
So
And then-
a
so
month or two,
at
maybe?
most, it might be another month and a half, 2 months.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks. It's great.
And there is no cost. We are there. There are costs for agencies or divisions of the state apparently, but we are not being charged for any of the costs associated with development of our site on New York Alert.
Thank you, Rob.
Sure.
This time, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to the full board for the authorization.
Does this have to be in the form of a motion, or does it just need
Motion.
our authorization?
Just a motion
Okay.
to authorize
All right. So
D to execute the agreement.
we need a motion on the floor here to authorize staff to execute the agreement.
I'll move that motion.
All right.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? My question to Mike Clark when I saw it was, are we a target now for terrorists? I saw the Homeland security.
Might
Yeah.
be, we're on the list now.
And I'm sure we are. All right, I have a motion and second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Mr. Hayes?
Next, we have a request for the board acceptance, a proposal from Kleinschmidt Associates, PAPC, to complete review of seismic deformation report for Stillwater Dam. Again, I'm going to put that over to Mr. Fulton.
Thank you. In September, the board was provided a memorandum summarizing the Stillwater Dam liquefaction and deformation analysis, which was completed by Rizzo Engineering back in July. The summary, Rizzo's seismic stability evaluation of the north embankment demonstrated that the occurrence of a maximum credible earthquake event would not result in an uncontrolled release of water, which is a positive finding on Rizzo's part, and that the dam, the North Embankment Dam, generally meets Federal Energy Regulatory Commission engineering guidelines criteria. FERC requires a review of this study by the 5th Part 12 independent consultant. That was Jeffrey Coffin of Kleinschmidt Associates, and that has to be completed prior to submitting Rizzo's report to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Staff requested and received a scope and fee proposal from Kleinschmidt for the completion of Mr. Coffin's review of Rizzo's liquefaction and deformation analysis, and that copy of that Kleinschmidt's proposal is attached to my memo. And Kleinschmidt proposes to complete a review of Rizzo's liquefaction and deformation analysis for a not-to-exceed amount of $9,400. And staff recommends acceptance of Kleinschmidt's proposal and seeks board authorization to form a contract for the completion of the work and authorization for the executive director to execute an agreement in the amount of $9,400.
Do they basically do the same thing that Kleinschmidt did, or how do,
Well,
what do they do?
At the time of the 5th Part 12's independent consultant safety inspection, Jeffrey Coffin of Kleinschmidt made certain recommendations. Among them was further analysis of the embankment with regard to stability and seismic response to seismic events. And the actual report, which was what Rizzo was hired to complete, is the document that Mr. Coffin then needs to review in order to satisfy his responsibilities as the independent consultant. So it's a review of the work done by Rizzo, which is what Coffin will complete.
So he doesn't go out and do any testing or?
No, it'll be
Just a
just an
review of the
in-office,
documents.
based on the information that he already has in hand as the independent consultant, plus the report itself. Yeah.
Pretty good pay?
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Fulton. This time, Mr. Chairman, I'll put it over to the full board
All
for
right.
acceptance.
So we have a resolution to accept Kleinschmidt Associates' proposal for the review of seismic deformation report for the Stillwater Dam. Any other comments or discussion? So do I have a motion?
So moved.
A motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Next, we have the chief engineer's report. turn that over to Mr. Fulton again.
Thank you. We'll go over it fairly briefly. Hudson River area had above average precipitation during the month of September. Actually, it was the second, if you remember, August was also above average. And our inflow at Great Sacandaga Lake actually was approximately 447% of historic average and 266% of average at Indian Lake. And in the Black River area, precipitation was approximately average at Stillwater, Old Forge, and Sixth Lake. And our inflow to Stillwater Reservoir was approximately equal to historic average. We've been fairly successful at Stillwater and Indian Lake to return the elevation of those reservoirs back to the target or historic averages or operation elevations, and are still working at Great Sacandaga Lake. Right now we are approximately 6 feet above our target elevation at Great Sacandaga Lake, which is actually about 11 feet above historic average at Great Sacandaga. And Old Forge and Sixth Lake, as usual, even with extreme events, we're usually pretty good at being able to maintain or fairly close to our target elevation, and those are actually already started more recently, slowly started to be lowered, but we'll be lowering those in earnest beginning tomorrow, actually, and that coincides with a whitewater rafting event. We've, over the years, have always preserved some of the water through the month of October to this point, help extend the recreation season on the Fulton chain, but we will begin drawing down Old Forge and Sixth Lake starting tomorrow.
My boat's out.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I got a phone call from one of the rafting companies up in the Indian Lake area last weekend,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to know why there was no water coming out of the dam.
Well,
What's our priority for the recreation industry?
Well, we don't have any commitment
Okay.
other than being a good neighbor, certainly at Indian Lake. The village, as well as the rafting companies, benefit greatly by the release that the district makes from Indian Lake Reservoir. In this particular case, our communication at the time we make a change in release goes to the village, and the village in turn should adjust their release out at Lake Abenaki. Apparently they did not after we made a change in our release, and so they continued releasing quite a bit of water for about 24 hours after we had made our release change and a reduction in release, and thus they depleted quite a bit of Abenaki.
Okay.
But we were able to accommodate them, and I don't believe that in the end their rafting event, which was the last of the season for that location, was negatively impacted at all.
Okay, good.
We provided some water for a short period of time so that Abenaki wouldn't be lowered anymore during the release that they make, the short-term release that they make, so that the rafting can occur. And we gave them about 4 hours worth of water, which probably helped recover the reservoir further, and at least covered it during the period of time when they had their rafting releases. And we did that on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Okay, good.
Excuse me, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
Yeah, it was Saturday when I got the call.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Sure.
I guess I have to live with it.
Well, there were some other issues with regard, I guess, DEC also had. They have a boat ramp that abruptly ends and drops off, and I think some different planning in the future for how you terminate that structure might certainly benefit them, but when we get to a certain point in the reservoir, They come to the end of their concrete slab, and it just is not convenient for bringing boats in and out anymore because it doesn't taper or terminate.
To watch that last step.
It just drops right off. So.
Thank you, Rob.
Sure.
Next, we have the Hudson River Area Administrator's Report, Mr. Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. My report starts on 134. I will keep it short and sweet. Just the highlights, assumed duties as the Hudson River Administrator. As Rob stated earlier, all staff participated in New York Alert Training Program via online and a conference call. I had a phone conversation with DEC in regards to the protection of an eagle's nest currently located on Scout Island. They're looking at ways that they can secure that area somehow, so we're in discussion about that. Let's see, we revised the Nextel Sprint cell phone plan and eliminated 2 unused phone lines at SFO, resulting in approximately savings of about $200 a month. And we're continuing looking at our other phone services and things that we can do at SFO to reduce overhead more. Staff is continuing with stakeouts. We're catching up now because we're not taking any new ones. Work permit applications have slowed now that everybody's gone home. And we're trying to catch up on those, so we're still busy with that, trying to play catch up with things. And just want to thank all staff for everything that they helped me out in my new position, and everybody at SFO has done a great job. Thank you.
What's a stakeout?
A stakeout is so you submit an application for a permit area that you just purchased a home.
Okay.
And
So you
then
go-
we go put our boundary lines in, showing them where the neighbors are more or less, and where there's a,
Yeah, I just want to make sure you weren't hiding in the bushes.
Only at the Belson.
It's not a barbecue.
no, we call it a stake.
You guys were doing something we weren't.
Thanks.
Thank you, John. Next, we have the Black River Area Administrator's Report, Mrs. Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. My report starts on, page 140, and I too will keep mine short. Obviously, the weather has been a great help for us in the Stillwater area as we continue to do patchwork on the surface face of the dam. We have just, as a matter of fact, pulled our staging off the dam this week and are done, so that's been very good. I'm not sure, I think I shared with you earlier, but the crew up in Stillwater designed and fabricated a staging system that's on wheels, and they lower it down on the front of the dam so that they can work right off, and they've done a nice job with it, and it's been very useful for us this year. So it'll be out again next year at some point, maybe you'll have a chance to catch it. So we are waiting for arrival of the stem on Gate 3 on our well. We have put in 5 extra brackets within the well to refortify, holding the stem in place this time, I guess, as compared to previously. So we are waiting for that. In the meantime, we are getting out our winter equipment and putting away summer equipment. We will be doing the last of our liming on the North Dyke at Stillwater within next week, I believe. Just finished putting new gravel up on the necessary dam road and getting that raked out for the winter season. I guess on behalf of my staff, too, I would like to thank the board and Mr. Astafan for bringing up the sensitivity that the staff is feeling. It's not just the senior staff, but all of our staff, because of our financial crisis. And I know that they do watch our webcast, and I think that it will give them some sense of assurance that you all are, too, sensitive to where they're at. So I want to thank you on their behalf.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
I guess that's all we have in operations.
Okay. Under board business, under old business, before we get to the motion, I'd like to bring up the fact that I would like to request that we have the hard copies of the board package brought for myself anyway, would everybody else agree to that at the meeting?
Yeah, I got
I don't need it sent to me. The electronic version's fine. Go ahead.
Two questions.
Sure.
Well, actually, what do you want the board packet,
I'd like a hard copy at each meeting.
to be brought to the meeting?
That's all, yes.
Okay. Well,
Exception.
Mr. Stover, though, I believe, would like when mailed to him.
I'd like to look at it before
That's
the
fine.
meeting.
Right, so if you were to get it, you'll still have it available online, so we'll meet the scene at 10 days before the meeting, but you would like it by, just quickly, Monday,
Well,
Tuesday,
whenever
I mean, if
you
you get
get
it early in that week, that would be fine?
Okay. Anybody else?
Because we send them out
requesting?
Friday.
I think it's Justin gets it too, don't you?
Yeah.
One requested a while
My name's
back.
on the
Okay.
list.
My printer's down.
Should be.
I was beating the heck out of my
So it's
printer.
Stover, Hayes,
Yeah.
Pass the Fan, Mal.
Leslie.
I just would like a hard copy at the meeting, the
Mr.
electronic is
Burgess would
fine
like
for
one.
me.
Mr. B.
Anyone else?
Mr. Finkel's okay, and Mr. Klein, I
Would
believe
you like
is
a hard
okay,
copy
but
of the
we will
meeting?
continue
No,
to
it's
bring
fine.
which
I
is the
don't
case.
Good.
This is,
He's way ahead of us.
I guess so.
He's high-tech.
I may go there, Ralph.
We don't need to.
Very expensive to gain.
Right,
Yes.
that's what I
Oh,
said.
my
It's
God.
good enough to
you
get
see
it to
page for one of these?
Either that or it's time consuming because we'll just print these 2 pages.
If
and
that
then we'll just
causes
print
a
these
big
3,
problem.
you know.
No, it
The
doesn't
only-
actually.
Again,
My eyes go blurry when I look at a screen
No,
for
that's all right.
120
That's
pages, you know.
I just lay in bed with my laptop. Read it.
Is that the best you can do?
That's the best I can do.
it's just, it's
That's
many jokes.
what I'm going to do. Yes.
we're still being recorded, too.
Okay, easy. All right. So we have Mr. Clark, the motion to, the mission statement.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if you recall at the last meeting, Mr. Leslie read to the board a revised mission statement for the Hudson River Black River Regulating District. That whole revision was spawned by a note or a letter from the Authority Budget Office that our mission statement was inadequate. Although our mission statement defined exactly what we do
Yeah.
to regulate the flows in the Hudson and Black River by providing flood protection, flow augmentation, we, in order to comply, we developed a more detailed mission statement, which was then, was read to the board last meeting, and in order to comply with the Authority Budget Office, subsequent to the meeting, it was submitted to the ABO, who got back to us and said they found it to be satisfactory. So, what we need to do at this point, or what I would ask that the board do, is adopt the new and improved mission statement. And I can read it to you if, once again, and to the board and into the record. Mission of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District is to construct, maintain, and operate reservoirs in the upper Hudson River and Black River watershed, including the Sacandaga, Indian, Moose, and Beaver River, for the purpose of regulating the flow of streams or rivers when required by public welfare, including public health and safety. Regulating reservoirs operated by the regulating district include Great Sacandaga Lake, Indian Lake, Stillwater Reservoir, Sixth Lake, and Old Forge. Benefits derived through the successful completion of the mission include, but may not be limited to, flood protection to the public corporations, parenthetically counties, and parcels of real estate, parenthetically power plants, downstream of said improvements. Low flow augmentation to provide sufficient water flow, enabling downstream wastewater treatment plants to avoid increased treatment costs associated with waste discharge to lower volume rivers, and enabling downstream hydroelectric plants to generate low-cost hydroelectric power in the hot summer months when rates are generally highest.
It shouldn't be.
So flood control and flow augmentation, in short.
If I could make one
Be
comment.
my guest.
There's no reference to Black River in there, in the first sentence. Sacandaga, and you could say black Indian moose, Sacandaga Indian, black moose and beaver river.
Yes, you're right.
Thanks.
Oh, the actual.
They got our money, now they forgot us.
Well, you guys are broke.
They already got the vote.
Black River watershed.
Because the improvements are on these here. Good.
Improvements are on the river specific.
Well,
Okay. What is the discussion?
that the improvements, on the second line of the mission statement,
Right.
the improvements to the Hudson and Black River watersheds are on Sacandaga, Indian, Moose, and Beaver Rivers. But,
But we also regulate the flow of the Black, don't we?
right, thereby regulating the flow of the Black. So it makes sense to, for me, from my perspective, it makes sense to put it in there.
But we also have a structure on the black too.
So,
Hawkinsville?
right.
Okay. Yeah.
Just add
So-
Beaver River, Black River.
Would you like me to reread that?
No.
So as revised, we're going to include Black River before
So
those.
include the Sacandaga, Indian, Black, Moose, and Beaver River.
Yeah.
Correct.
I suspect that the Authority Budget Office would not note that
No.
omission.
And we call that the Old Forge Reservoir? I'm just curious.
Technically.
Okay.
Old Forge Pond, really, but. Yeah, reservoir.
Okay. I know we call it, it's the Fulton Chain is what.
We have a motion.
All right, so, any other questions, discussions, comments?
No.
All right, so I need a motion to accept the new and revised mission statement.
So also move it.
All right, so moved in a second. Mr. Finkel, Mr. Stover.
Finkel was first.
Yes, there's a motion.
Mr. Stover.
What's the second?
Gotcha.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you. Any new business to be brought up? Okay. And I need a motion to schedule the next board meeting at the Saratoga County offices on November 2nd. Take note.
Make a motion.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Stover, second. All right, all in favor?
They're all bad.
Aye. Opposed? So moved. Motion for adjournment?
I'll move.
So,
I'll say.
Okay.
Wouldn't have nobody-
All in favor of the
You're all-
adjournment?
Aye.
Aye, aye.